In the last hour or so, it's announced that President Putin has approved the changes to the Russian nuclear doctrine that represents a marked escalation in Moscow's strategic military posture. It's published on the 19th, that's today. The revised policy now says that the scenarios under which nuclear weapons could be used are expanded. Notably, it includes responses not only to nuclear aggression but also to large-scale conventional attacks, particularly those involving missiles, drones, or aerospace incursions, and the inclusion of conventional warfare as a potential nuclear trigger signals a profound and disturbing shift in Russia's defensive framework. The updated doctrine says that any attack by a non-nuclear state supported by a nuclear-armed ally will be treated as a joint assault, legitimizing the potential use of nuclear retaliation. This new policy scope underscores the Kremlin's view that military coalitions such as NATO must be perceived as unified entities in acts of aggression. The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has emphasized that the doctrine is a necessary adaptation to modern threats, particularly Western military aid to Ukraine, which Moscow perceives as increasingly perilous. We've got to remember that the aggressor here was Moscow, which invaded a sovereign country. So any attacks on Moscow by Ukraine, or any attacks on Russian soil by Ukraine, are a response to the invasion by Russia, by the Kremlin. The timing of these changes coincides with the 1,000th day today of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and President Joe Biden's decision about 2 days ago to authorize Kyiv to deploy long-range ATACMS missiles within Russian territory if necessary. This development drew sharp warnings from Moscow, including threats by the former President Dmitry Medvedev, who seems to have become the mouthpiece of craziness, who suggested that any use of Western missiles against Russia would prompt a response involving weapons of mass destruction. And Putin's new decree also designates that an attack on Belarus, Russia's ally and strategic partner, could justify nuclear action, emphasizing the Kremlin's commitment to its regional alliances. The doctrine further clarifies that a large-scale conventional assault, even if non-nuclear, will be treated with the utmost severity if considered a critical threat to Russian sovereignty or territorial integrity. The Kremlin's intention behind these policy adjustments is clear: to serve as a deterrent against Western military support for Ukraine, to reinforce Russia's readiness to escalate if necessary. And analysts note that these shifts heighten the stakes in Ukraine and beyond, solidifying concerns that any miscalculation involving advanced Western weaponry could trigger severe consequences. The doctrine solidifies Russia's narrative of framing itself as a nation under siege, justifying extreme defensive measures, while implicitly cautioning Western allies about the repercussions of further military involvement. This, of course, is a lie. It's untrue. As the war in Ukraine continues, Putin's reaffirmation of Russia's nuclear readiness signals that Moscow is determined to safeguard its interests with an increasingly assertive approach, with an eye on the propaganda that it's circulating around the larger country of Russia, encompassing both its own security and that of allied nations like Belarus. We have made major missteps in supporting Ukraine, major missteps, and the biggest misstep is we foolishly think that the propaganda of Putin is aimed at us in the West. It's aimed primarily at his own people, to pitch the special military operation, the war against Ukraine, as a defensive war. That war began demonstrably with paramilitary operations in the Donbass by the Wagner Group and others, fomenting discontent, and actual conflict, which was then blamed on Ukraine, of course, this false flag that gives Moscow the excuse to come into Kyiv, to take over, to remove its democratically elected president. And those people who talk about this war starting in 2014 need to reflect that Zelensky was not president at that time. Zelensky came in as a figure determined to uproot corruption and to lead his nation, and he has demonstrably done that. It's Zelensky who goes to the front line to rally the troops, not Putin. Putin sits in his Smeg fridge in Moscow or in Sochi, or he hides in his secret train. Putin doesn't go to the front line to rally his troops. Anyway, he couldn't speak the language. Most of the troops now seem to be North Korean. This is a mercenary army. But Putin is no stranger to mercenaries. That's what he relied on to foment the problems in Ukraine in the first place, to give him an excuse to go in.